Hi, everybody. I'm Ann Riley. I'm with the New York City Brewers Guild. Although half our room is New York City, so you know who I am. I'm basically the Paul for New York City. Thanks for coming to this session this afternoon. Bo Evers is the National Sales Manager at Crosby Hops, where he leads the key account manager team, focusing on sales strategy, education, training, and team development. With 13 years in the hop industry, he played a key role in launching Crosby Hops' sales efforts, working alongside Blake Crosby to grow the company from its early days. Over the past decade, he has built strong relationships with brewers across the country, spending 6 years in Portland, Oregon, 6 years in Asheville, North Carolina, and now based in Dripping Springs, Texas. Passionate about helping brewers make their best beers, he's excited to share insights on hop industry trends, providing practical takeaways, and help breweries navigate the evolving hop landscape. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, stuff's changing. What's up, y'all? Love that everybody is sitting in the front. You got teachers' pets. Usually everyone sits in the back, you know. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. And yeah, can everyone hear me? We're good? Cool. I want to do a little icebreaker to kind of start it off. Raise your hand if you are a brewer and you only buy spot hops. Okay, handful. Raise your hand if you currently have a hop contract or have had a hop contract in the past year. Okay. Raise your hand if you have had significant hop overages or just have been long on hops at some point in the past few years. Yeah, a little bit of a majority there. Cool. Well, we're going to go over the evolving landscape of the Pacific Northwestern industry. I'm not really going to talk about any of the other hop growing states in the U.S., whether that's Michigan, New York, Maine, Colorado, even though there's some good hops growing in Colorado now. They won the Cascade Cup gold actually the past 2 years, so pretty impressive to see that. But really focusing on PNW, so that's Washington, Idaho, and Oregon, the three biggest hop growing states, which get grouped into the USDA NASS report for the 2024 National Hop Report. And anyone smaller than that, I would recommend touching base with your local growers here in New York if you want to learn more information about that. I'm sure they have their own stats. But I'm specifically going off the USDA report. And the NASS is the National Agricultural Statistical Survey. So it's kind of a combination between NASS and USDA. Also, if anyone wants to shout out questions anytime, yeah, we can save them for the end as well. But just shout them out, and I'll, call on you. Okay, so the purpose of the USDA National Hop Report is predominantly to look at individual states and hop acreage in each state by variety, and also it goes into yields and production for each of those varieties. If there is under 100 acres of a certain variety in a state, they actually don't record any kind of data, not only just because it's not significant enough or maybe it's still experimental. So that's the reason why, another big reason being maybe it's an up-and-coming proprietary variety, it hasn't been named yet, and if it's in a small growing state, one of the smaller growing states like Oregon or Idaho, they might not want that proprietor might not want that variety to be on that data just for trade secrets purposes. So anything over 100 acres is actually recorded, and all the Pacific Northwestern hop growers all do a very tedious job in making sure that they're accurately recording all of this data so that it can be projected out to not only other growers and vendors, but also to the entire U.S. Brewing world. So we're going to go over production, acreage trends, yields, varieties that are on the decline, whether severely, drastically, remaining flat. There's not much going up these days in terms of hop acreage, so we will go over that. Going over key takeaways, challenges, opportunities, and the like. Okay, I will do my best to describe this to y'all. So on the x-axis at the bottom, we've got harvest year, so that's crop 20 through crop 24. And then in the y-axis, in the teal color, we have area harvested, and that's in tens of thousands of acres, right? So there at the top, you've got 60,000 acres as an example. And then for the production, in that green color next to it, those are millions of pounds of hops, right? So just a good way to look at it. I'll just look at crop 20 first, but that teal section, that's 58,000 acres that were harvested that year, and then 104 million pounds next to it. So that's just how you can read it. And then that little arrow where it says 3.7, that is the actual year-over-year acreage growth for that specific category. And then the green one next to it, that is the production decrease year-over-year. So, which means there was a 3.7% increase from crop 19 to crop 20, and there was a 7.1 decrease in production year-over-year from 19 to 2020. Make sense? Cool. Some of the trends that you will see here, 2024 is looking a little dire, right? There has been an 18% decrease year-over-year in acreage from crop 23 to crop 24. And then also you will see a production decrease of 16% year-over-year, which brought us at 87 million pounds of hops grown, which is pretty significant from the 104 million grown in 2023, 102 in 2022, and 116, which is the peak in crop 21. Of course, keep in mind, these are crop years. These are all brewed with the year after, right? But clearly you can see that peak in the bell curve of crop 21. That's when, there's about 61,000 acres in the country, 116 million pounds, and here we are now at 44.8 thousand acres and 87 million pounds. So pretty drastic decrease. So from crop 21 to crop 24, that's a decrease of 26% of the acres in the Pacific Northwest. So think of the infrastructure, the CapEx, that includes trellising, hop trucks, all the pickers that went in, all the hires, R&D. Either of those acres are being torn out of the ground to put in a new crop. Could be like in Oregon, could be filbert trees, could be berries, could be grass seed, it could be cannabis, could be vegetables, whatever. Or growers will lay fields fallow where they still have the hops in the ground, still have the trellising, but they're actually not farming it. Yeah, they'll do like irrigation applications and smaller applications, but they won't string the hops, they won't pick the hops, pelletize them, and sell them out in the marketplace. And then, so those are kind of the couple options if you want to take your acreage out, or if you could just lay fields fallow and maybe come back a year or two later, but that field's not producing if you lay it fallow for a year or two. So it's just kind of sitting on it. Some key industry trends, production's down 16% year over year as mentioned, and the acreage reduced by 18% from 2023 to 2024. Right now, kind of in a critical time of the year, right? So we're 6 months past harvest, so this data is still relevant, even though crop 24 was last fall. Interestingly enough, the Southern Hemisphere hop harvest is happening right now. So I'm sure if you follow any New Zealand or Australian hop growers or vendors, your Instagram feeds are blowing up with Nelson Harvest and Galaxy Harvest and everything like that. But there are significant things happening on the grower level in the Pacific Northwest or here in Northern Hemisphere. You have hop stringing that's happening. You have irrigation as hops are starting to come out of the ground now. You've got cutbacks, maybe some pre-applications of sprays. So that's currently happening right now, and growers are making some really critical decisions in terms of what acres do they want to grow and harvest this fall. So there's talks, and the American Hop Convention was in San Diego this past January, and you get all the growers, all the vendors, big brewers, large regionals, all attending this, and the general consensus is that there's going to be an additional 10% acreage cut for crop 25. Of course, we won't truly know that stat until the Acre Strong report comes out in June. Once again, that's through the USDA and ASS. So pay attention to that. Yeah, I don't know if there's a way to subscribe to it, but usually certain vendors will share that information via PDF, or you can just type it into a general search engine and easily pull it up. But yeah, another 10% is going to be kind of what's expected. So pretty scary for a lot of hop growers out there. And it's not even across the board, right? One grower might be down 50% of acres, another one might be down 25%. So, but just as an average, that's where we are right now. So as you can tell, this report signals it will take some additional time for demand to meet supply. As y'all know, hops are good for 5 to 7 years. Of course, most craft breweries really only want to use hops within 3 years old. Structural shifts affecting brewers. As you may know, concentration of all the hop acreage is in Yakima Valley, Washington. It's about 75%. So 3 out of every 4 boxes utilized coming from the Pacific Northwest is grown in Yakima. So that's a lot of eggs in one basket. So you'll also see an increasing dominance of private breeding programs, all varieties we know and love, that have really helped drive craft to where it is now. Of course, some of these varieties got over their skis, and you will see a significant, or I will show you a significant decline in acreage in some of those very large proprietaries. And then we'll kind of go into the endangered hop varieties. These are varieties either that are private, that launched too little too late, or maybe public varieties that are just kind of fallen out of favor, either from the grower for agronomic reasons or just demand. There's just no demand for certain varieties like Rainier or Liberty or some of these kind of obscure public domestics that maybe helped build craft 20, 30 years ago, but really are irrelevant in today's day and age. You know, if it's not going in an IPA, then maybe it doesn't hit. Yeah.
Question on that. So obviously supply and demand being what's driving a lot of this acres loss. Do you have a sense of how many brewers are along of their own contracts? They do have, years of supply either in the brewery or contract that we haven't used it. But do you have a sense of how long that will take to work through the system?
That is the billion-dollar question. No one really knows. Everyone can kind of look at the crystal ball and try to take your best guess of when all those overages will finally level out and the supply and demand curve finally meets in the middle. But as you know, hop growers only have one shot per year to make certain decisions, whether it's stringing or planting. In the state of Oregon, for example, we can plant, let's just say we plant this spring or summer, we're not going to harvest those fields or those baby acres this fall of 25. We would wait until fall of 26 to actually get our first good yield. Now, Yakima, Washington, and Idaho, they can string baby fields, baby yards, whatever you want to call it. So first year plantings, they can harvest that fall. And you can get upwards of 60+% yield, with irrigation, fertilizer, you name it. But still, you only have one shot per year. And but to come back to your question, it could be 2027, 2028, ideally sooner. Who knows, right? It depends on craft beer and its performance, which we know is going down ever so slightly. So it's a really, really good question. Also, hops don't get any younger. Hops sitting in the cooler, all of a sudden crop 19 or crop 18 isn't as desirable as it was 3 years ago. So eventually it's getting to a point where brewers are having to come to the period of rationalization of throwing hops away. It's like, okay, it's just sitting in our cooler. Let's cut our losses, take a loss on it, write it off for tax purposes, and get the monkey off our back, right? Now, as vendors, we will write hops off after 3+ years old if it's not contracted. So we take the hit in terms of writing hops off and move on, right? It's just, because once they become 4 years old, selling it on the spot market is almost impossible, right? Because typically brewers will want to buy from other brewers to help them out. and for freight implications. You want to buy from the brewery down the way, but that's just kind of the reality of the market right now. But with modern packaging and getting less than 1% residual oxygen in bags, hop quality these days is better than it's ever been. So that is the good news. Is hops that are 5 years old, smell them, they're probably pretty good. Did that answer your question? That was a long answer, wasn't it? Yeah. So clearly there's a market recalibration happening right now. And balancing that supply and demand is really important. And that inventory surplus makes some really, really large ripples in the hop industry. And I already mentioned there are further production cuts expected, or acreage cuts in 2025 crop, about 10%. I know you've heard this from so many hop growers or vendors, of the importance of proactive planning. The issue now is brewers don't know what you're going to be brewing in brew year of 27 or 28, right? What's going to be the new style? What's going to be the new hop? What's the risk reward that you take when it comes to especially future hop contracts? I think ultimately what's going to happen is there's going to be certain varieties that are niche, that don't have a lot of acres in the ground, that may get more challenging to source. Let's just say like a Mount Hood, for example. And if a bunch of brewers come in and looking for crop 27 Mount Hood, and it's already spring of 28, that inventory might not exist. Although we can plant, right? But in Oregon, it takes 2 years. So communication, I'm sure you've heard it 1,000 times. Here's some state snapshots. In the top left, we have Washington State. Oregon is in the teal colored blue. And then Idaho, of course, is the green color. This is the acres and the percentage of each. So Washington State's about 75%. Oregon's holding steady right around 12.5% of the acres. And Idaho actually has decreased a little bit, closer to 13% of the acres. So for Washington State, they definitely dominate at 64 million pounds grown in crop 24. And as I'm sure you're aware, Citra Mosaic as the aromas are the two dominant varieties. Of course, you also have some newcomers, which isn't a big focus in this room, of course, but I think Pato is no longer the name, but it's a high alpha HBC variety that really took the industry by storm, and there's a lot of acres of that, mainly for alpha to go into CO2 hop extract. Of course, Columbus is still very strong as well, or CTZs. In Idaho, they saw the largest percentage decline year over year of 34% out of the ground. Pretty significant. Also, there's a big focus for alpha varieties in that state. So close to 2/3 of the acreage is going to the alpha market for macros, turning into extract. Oregon, this is an interesting stat and something we like to hang our hat on. In the entire state of Oregon, aroma hops dominate. So 85% of the acres in the state of Oregon are aroma that are being pelletized and not turned into extract. Total production was close to 10 million pounds. And we've hence dubbed Oregon, this is the shameless plug of the aroma state, mainly based off of ratio. Some key variety trends, and so for this graph on the right, you can see you've got thousands of acres on the left-hand column, and you've got crop year 2022 through 2024. And these are some of the major varieties, and as you'll see, Citra and Mosaic both saw significant acreage reductions as the supply continues to exceed demand. This is just because there's a lot of Citra Mosaic that was harvested from 2019, 2020 through crop 23. So folks are still sitting on a lot of that inventory. But you can see how drastic that Citra decline is. That doesn't mean they're going away. Don't worry. It just means that there was just vendors or growers got a little over their skis, and this stuff happens. Simcoe and Cascade have also seen slight decreases as well to reflect the evolving trends. Amarillo and Centennial also, it's pretty interesting. You can see those are pretty steady. That means that the demand's there, supply's good, not a lot of changes. So that's in this market, that's where you want to see your hop acreage for certain varieties. Is that you'll notice that CTZ had a nice spike and kind of went down again. But generally speaking, everything is down. Chinook's down a little bit. Eureka's pretty flat as well. And just for reference, it would turn into like a spaghetti bowl of different lines. So this is kind of some of the bigger aroma acres or varieties by acreage. So it goes from 12,000 acres to 2,000 acres. This next graph, it goes from 200 acres to 1.2 thousand, right? So it's a little easier to see and on the eyes. So you'll see here that both El Dorado and Strata, those lines actually match up perfectly. At first we were like, this like, how can that be for 3 years? But they actually, we triple checked the math. El Dorado and Strata are on that same trajectory. One of the reasons for some of that is just pandemic, changing trends, kind of a shift to the lager, whatever it is. Also, interestingly enough, organic varieties, there's not too many organic acres left out there anymore. You're seeing acreage for organics has dropped to 482 acres from 634 in 2023. Also, you'll see on here, Idaho 7's dropped, and Equinaut actually has gone up a little bit, so that's good to see. Nugget's gone down, Common's gone down, and same with Hood. And kind of once you start getting to that below 200 acres, that's what we call starting to get in the endangered zone. So these are some of the varieties at risk, right? So this is varieties that are, so this graph is 1,000 acres all the way down to 50, and then anything that's below 50 starts getting a dotted line because it's not even reported anymore. So you'll see Kashmir took a massive tumble, down 60% in 2 years. Comet down 64%. Mount Hood, another endangered variety, only 142 acres left in Oregon. Mount Rainier is pretty much non-existent at this point. Heavily used by some of the macros. Sabro down close to 70%, Talus 78%, and then Triumph, Zappa, Atanum, which is a YCR variety. No reported acreage on either of those three. Okay. So this is my personal Venmo. Make sure to send me some money. I'm just playing. This is actually a QR code for a nice little survey that I'm going to do with the crowd. So I'm going to give you guys about a minute to fill it out, and it'll go into certain varieties, whether or not they're important to your portfolio or not. And there's also a section where you can include varieties that weren't on that list. So I'll give it about a minute or so. Judging by there's still people looking down on your phone, I would assume that people are still finishing up, so I'll give it another few seconds. Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. So we've got 15 responses submitted. I think I keep updating if you press submit. 17 now. Oh, Catherine, slow down. Okay. All right. Atanum and Mount Hood. No votes. Kashmir getting 33% of the votes here, and Comet 50%. So if you go back, see where the Comet was. Yeah, Comet's down 64% in acreage across the Pacific Northwest since 2022. So think about that. Okay, and I think, what's up? Oh, excuse me. Let me scroll down. There we go. Yeah, so Mount Rainier got 0%, not surprising at all. Sabro got 0% as well. And let's see if there's anything below that. Talis got 16%, Triumph got 0%, and Zappa got 0%. Yeah. Okay, I'm trying to click on the next question here. For some reason, it's not coming up. Let's try this. Going off script here. Oops. Oh well. Anyone want to shout out any of the varieties from the past that meet current style trends and needs a reboot? Don't be shy.
Pelletized age hops.
Pelletized aged hops. All right. Is that like leaf hops that are aged that get pelletized? Is that what you're asking for?
Yeah.
Okay.
You used to be able to buy them in the mornings and times.
Okay. What about pelletized hops that are just aged?
Not quite the same.
Yeah. Anything else?
I thought Columbus was a good one. Like, I think it does fit a lot of the style, like, requirements a lot of beer talk now, but I feel like it's slowly, surely getting the attention it needs, but definitely an older top that definitely meets the requirements.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the most economic hops in the industry right now. When I say that, it's the cheapest. See the little marketing spin I put on there? Columbus absolutely is still very critical to so many recipes around the country in craft. It's just not showcased, right? The showcase varieties are going to be the proprietaries, the Citra, Mosaic, Stratas of the world. People just don't know that CTZs are being put in that beer. It's what I call the COGS hops, cost of goods sold, right? It's going to really help lower your cost of goods if you're introducing some of those old school varieties, high alpha, high oil. Yeah, that's a great one. But yeah, definitely needs a reboot. I think, mainly because it's mostly turned into alpha. That's kind of why it's just considered an alpha variety, and folks don't really consider using it on the hot side, like whirlpool or dry hopping. I mean, there's still some brewers on the West Coast, especially in Oregon, that swear by doing a little dry hop with Columbus. Yeah. Any other varieties out there?
Wasn't my answer, but at your booth earlier, someone from Industrial Arts told me they used Comet a lot in their section.
Yep. Yep. Let's see how I'm doing on time here. 3 minutes. So consequently, you're seeing pricing and margin pressure. I think y'all know at this point in time that now is kind of the best time to buy hops. Why? Declining average prices. Right now, the average price per pound across the U.S. has decreased 16% from crop 22 to crop 24. And that's on average across the board. That doesn't take into account like some of these massive decreases in acreage or some of the massive oversupply. But that 16%, I think that's a conservative number. I think this doesn't really account for the secondary or tertiary hop markets, right? The going to an exchange to buy hops or buying it from your friend that's just at this point trying to get it out for bottom dollar. So some economic challenges is the average price per pound of hops across all major production states often falls below break-even costs. So right now you have certain growers that are selling to vendors at cost or below cost, which I think if you guys made beer and you were doing that, selling it below cost, you wouldn't be in business for very much longer. It doesn't really make a lot of financial sense. That indicates an average performing farm would be operating at a loss. Hence why all these acres are coming out of the ground. This misalignment between production costs and market returns underscores significant economic challenges for the industry. Also, due to research on this as well, but in the Pacific Northwest, it's already been enacted in Washington State, and it's happening currently in Oregon. There's been farm overtime workers laws that have been passed that might be over a 4 or 5 year period. So typically, farm workers don't get overtime pay. And in those states now, over time, I think it's like 60 hours a week, you start getting overtime pay, and then the next year it'll be 55, the next year it'll be 50, next year 45. Yeah, so right now that's putting a lot of labor increases on farms, right? And farms are their heaviest time of labor is during hop harvest or stringing. And then the rest of the season, there's really not a ton of labor on the farm side. I'm not speaking to the vendor side and production and everything like that, but just on the farm side, there's significantly increased labor costs during hop harvest, where you're running 24/7 for anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks, depending on how large your farm is. So this is causing growers to mechanize, automate, increase efficiencies on the production side, more equipment. Okay, so this slide right here, yeah.
Just a question.
Yeah.
Thinking about having to kind of dial back production, have you seen any trends in hop farmers diversifying their farms? So say growing more marijuana in order to kind of supplement the loss of this, in a sense that that land isn't ever going to come back for hop production because it makes more sense for them to parcel off, say 10% and focus on berry production, just because it makes more sense, especially for the labor, to spread it out a little bit more instead of having it at those 2 specific times?
Absolutely. Growers are extremely resilient, especially in today's day and age and technology and the proliferation of really awesome things to grow. The one bad thing right now is that no crop is killing it, right? Normally growers would be like, okay, maybe hops aren't doing great this year, so I'm going to plant onions in Idaho or something like that. Or, hops aren't doing well this year or the next year or so, so I'm going to plant filbert trees for hazelnuts. None of that's doing well right now. So that's the conundrum that growers are running into, is that, yeah, they can switch to something else, but it might not be super profitable. Hops aren't, I think like a few years ago, I saw some stats that in the state of Washington, I think hops were the 8th most profitable crop in Yakima. So there were 7 other options that were more profitable than growing hops themselves, right? Apples, could be cannabis, could be wine grapes, right? So that's the tough part. There's really nothing that's great. Now, you mentioned cannabis. The issue with cannabis, it's not federally legal, so what's grown in the state of Washington has to stay there, I'm pretty sure. Same with Oregon. You can't distribute outside state lines. It's interstate commerce. I think that's when certain federal organizations will start getting involved with that and shutting that down. So that's the issue, right? Everyone decided to get in the cannabis or the hemp game all at once, and it just got super saturated, right? Great question, thank you. So this slide right here is yield variations across state. So in Washington, they saw an increase from close to 1,700 pounds per acre in 2022 to a peak of 1,900 or close to 2,000 pounds per acre in 2023. And then they saw a slight decrease or a decline in crop 24 to 1,900 pounds per acre. In Idaho, they did see an increase of 31% in 2 years to about 2,200, 2,300 pounds per acre in 2024. That's because of the big shift from aroma to alpha. Typically, alpha and bittering hops have higher yields, like CTZ or Pato. So that's why you see that. And then in Oregon, it gets a little bit more variability just because it's 85% of the acres are aroma. But it rebounded in 2024 to about 1,700 acres. Of course, growers though, in grower talk, they'll say bales per acre. So you just divide that number by 200 to get the amount of bales, right? So 1,700, it's about 6, excuse me, oh my gosh. That's 8.5 bales. Simple math. To go over the yield analysis highlights, Oregon did have the highest citra yield at about 1,700 pounds per acre in 2024, compared to Washington's 1,500 pounds per acre and Idaho's close to 1,600. Interestingly enough, Strata did see yields up 21% year over year in Oregon. I think that's mainly because of some of the younger, I guess kind of baby acres now becoming more mature. Hop acres do become more mature over time as they build out their base roots. So that's kind of a reason you'll see that. Oregon's a very different growing region than the high desert of Yakima and very different than Idaho. They're all different latitudes and all susceptible to different things. I think the biggest issue this year right now that most growers are worried about, yes, not only seeing decrease in acreage, but also drought. Yakima is experiencing one of the worst droughts it's ever seen in about 50 years. So that's a pretty big concern because a lot of the water comes from the Cascades, and if the snowpack's not great, so drought is definitely a concern for certain Yakima growers. As certain districts and water rights, you might get cut off first in your area, and then as the drought gets worse, other areas get cut off next. So that's where you kind of have to start phoning a friend, like a farmer friend down the way, and having to buy water from them. Just kind of crazy. Okay, this graph is really, really representative of where we are in terms of hop acreage, public and proprietary, right? So USDA public, that means anyone can grow it. Even New York State growers can grow it. So Cascade, Centennial, Chinook kind of being the classics. And then proprietary, meaning it's coming from a private breeding program. Could be from Hopsteiner's breeding program, Hop Breeding Company, Yakima Chief Ranches, Latitude 46. There's a plethora of different private breeding programs out there that have come out with so many great varieties that we all know and love. Strata, Citra Mosaic, Simcoe, so on and so forth. But you can look at that graph there, and 65% of the acres in the Pacific Northwest are proprietary, and 35% are public, right? So that really limits a lot of the non-Pacific Northwestern growing regions of growing certain proprietaries. I'm sure some of y'all have asked your New York growers, hey, can I get Citra, can I get Mosaic, can I get Strata? And they say, no, we don't have a license for it, and the chances of getting a license are slim to none. Now, if you looked at this graph, I'd say about 10 years ago, it was 2/3 public and 1/3 private. So just in that amount of time, you've seen a massive shift to proprietary varieties.
Would a significant amount of that be due to brewers wanting to source more local and the rise of New York, Colorado, all of these other areas outside the Pacific Northwest increasing their production? Or do you feel like there's a more significant reason than that?
I think I understand your question. So like
if I wanted to get Cascade, US Cascade, I would more likely look to New York, at least if the prices were competitive, because the story to my consumer would make more sense to source it locally than to have it shipped across country if I could get it.
Absolutely. And that's the cool part. It's like seeing the growth of hop growers here in the state of New York, Colorado, Maine, of course Michigan, I think is the 4th biggest hop growing region in the country. Although they increased significantly, it's all probably the largest declines. I do need to look up Michigan's numbers, but I think at one point they got close to about 1,000 acres plus, maybe closer to like creeping up to 1,500 acres per year. I'm not sure where they are now, but I think they've seen pretty big declines. I think the local terroir effect of wanting New York grown Cascade or New York grown Centennial or Comet or Columbus, whatever grows well here, that is absolutely on the rise, and especially from a freight consideration as well. The smaller you are as a hop grower, the operating costs are higher. So that is the issue, is being able to source hops to compete with P&W hops, right?
And infrastructure, like getting it from the vine to
Yep.
package.
Yeah. The economy of scale for hops, it's extremely expensive, right? So I'm doing on time here. Some of the structural changes in the industry, as mentioned, proprietary domination. Right now, for the aroma hop category, 70% are privately controlled or proprietary. And you've seen an increased concentration. 75% of the hop acres are located in Yakima Valley. That's actually up 3% since crop 22. The industry is increasingly reliant on this one region, so eggs in baskets. Of course, disruption in climate, natural disasters, water availability, we just talked about drought, or workforce can pose major industry threats. So that's always on the minds of farmers. Getting towards the end here, actually just recently, I actually was able to add this. On March 14th, the USDA NASS report, they came out with their hop stocks report. Kind of the big headline on this, which is actually good, is that, so this is some good news, is that hop stocks are down 6% from a year ago. So if you look at this graph, you've got millions of pounds on the y-axis, and you've got time on the x-axis, and then the orange line is where the hop stocks are for March 1, and then the blue line is where the hop stocks are for September 1. As you'll notice, from 2005 through 2011, the delta between the orange and the blue lines was thinner, and that's what you want to see. And you'll notice things started to get a little heavier, and you started to see a bigger disparity between the orange and blue lines right around 2014-15, and then you really saw in like 2018-19 kind of this big disparity between. So really, this just goes to show the amount of hop stocks that are not only in dealers' coolers, but also growers and brewers as well. So it is good to see those lines come back closer, especially in 2023, 2024. So yeah, it's kind of crazy to see how many millions of pounds are currently in existence right now. And this just kind of breaks it down, hop stocks held by growers, dealers, and brewers. So you'll see what dealers and growers are holding on to versus what brewers are holding on to. So you'll notice here we are, March 1 of 2020, well, we're in March of 2025, and growers and dealers are holding 150 million pounds of hops in their coolers right now. This also takes into account extract as well. So you have to consider that, an extract that has a very long shelf life. And brewers have been pretty consistently holding on to, in the 20 million, so right now they're at 23 million pounds of hops that are sitting in brewers' coolers. This is the entire country. This includes craft and macro. One caveat with this graph is that it doesn't show what is paid for and what's unpaid for, or what's contracted versus what's on spot. That's the big question mark. WTF? What's the future? Really creating a sustainable path forward, industry recalibration. We need to be able to safeguard the competitive dynamics that foster innovation and sustainabilities. Of course, brewers vote with your dollar, and y'all keep the market thriving with diversity and choice. Some would argue that there's almost too much choice, too many hops from too many different places, and too many new releases. We like to call them shiny objects. And also what you've noticed is maybe hop gets developed and bred and released, and maybe it's not the right time. So a lot plays into that as well. Maybe that certain variety that has that certain aroma characteristic that maybe was cool back in 2005 is no longer relevant, and that's really dictated by your consumer and the brewer. So right now, being able to champion diversity in hop varieties, regions, suppliers, a lot of our bigger clients will intentionally have hops that they source from in multiple areas and regions of Europe. They'll have their P&W varieties, and they'll have their Southern Hemisphere varieties, just to make sure that, let's just say that they brew 500,000 barrels a year, that if there's a devastation in one of those regions, that they're diversified and they can flex. Even here domestically in the US, you'll ask certain brewers and they'll say, I only have one hop contract with one vendor that's based in Washington State. And, maybe y'all have experienced hop smoke taint before in 2020 through 2022. And there was a lot of smoke tainted hops out there. And so being able to diversify your supply chain is really important. And being able to support long-term industry health through resilient hop supply and collaborative partnerships between brewers, vendors, processors, farmers. Okay. Any questions?
One more. With as crazy as the economy is and kind of uncertainty in our government right now, I'm completely unaware if subsidies are a component of hop farmers. So there is zero. Is there any work on brewing lobbyists to push for that in order to help keep this industry sustainable in the event of any major issues that could occur in the future, whether it's the blight or whether it's more forest fires that would affect destruction of crops or affecting the crops or anything like that? Or is it something that maybe we should consider as an industry?
I mean, subsidies would be awesome. The only issue is you can't eat hops, so it probably won't ever be considered by the federal government for subsidies because it's not feeding mouths. And hops are such a small industry in comparison to other crops that it is far down on the list of priorities. You're going to see subsidies for corn or wheat or any of these crops that get consumed, and there's millions upon millions of acres. I guess for barley, you'd have to ask your local maltsters kind of how that works. The interesting thing about barley is that it can go to human consumption. Obviously, the best stuff's going to beer, and the rest is going to cattle, right, as feed. So there's multiple outlets that way. That's the tricky part about the hop industry is we don't have any other industries to sell to.
Yeah, is there effort in that regard, like finding other applications for?
People have been trying for decades. And yes, I don't know, I've heard that Tom's, the deodorant, has some hops in it, but it's so minute, and I don't know many people that use that deodorant. I think from a pharmaceutical side of things, absolutely vendors do sell extracts and oils to pharmaceutical companies or therapeutics as well, but it's, hops are so concentrated that it's not a massive part of the business, right? 99.98% of the hop industry is going into beer.
Are you guys positioning yourself with your Euro business to bring hops over to hedge against tariffs or anything like that?
Tariffs have been a big concern recently, especially for our Canadian brewers, right? When it comes to sourcing European hops, yes, we're absolutely worried about that. Thankfully, we got most of our Crop 24 containers before any kind of tariffs, or in the future when they do go into place. I do think that we will have a container or two that are either in transit or still being packed in Germany that will likely be susceptible to getting a tariff, which gets assessed at the port of entry. And that's technically a governmental fee, so that cost would be passed on to our brewers, unfortunately. But the good news is that hops are already kind of rock bottom, so it doesn't make a massive impact by any means. It'd be really shitty if hops were very high priced and you get slapped on with a tariff and more fees. That would not be fun. So.
On that note, are there any efforts to establish American produced varieties that can be through noble hop type stuff? In the varieties that we discussed today, I didn't see a lot of schools that are made.
Yep. Domestic private breeding programs are trying to come up with suitable substitutes for some of these European noble varieties, middle fruit, sots, kind of hops like that. The climate and soil and terroir is so different between Europe and the United States that it's really tough to like actually truly achieve that. Yes, there are varieties that have been bred from the USDA and released over the past many decades that include Sterling, Mount Hood, Willamette. They're all, it's what we call noble-esque. It's not true noble, but it's esque, right? I know that Adina has been touted as a noble-esque variety that's coming from the Latitude 46 breeding program. I'm sure HBC, YCR, Haas, I'm sure they all have some kind of noble variety that they are currently in development or breeding and will likely be launched. It was more of a concern, even before tariffs were on the table, the exchange rate, that was the killer, right? And that's where like some of the big macros were looking at some of these noble-esque varieties because, the euro to dollar exchange rate, I remember 10, 15 years ago, you're losing 35 cents to the dollar. Every time you bought a euro, right, it was $1.35. So that was a concern then. Thankfully now, euro to USD's gotten closer to parity. I think it hovers every day, but 9 or 8 cents, something like that, 10 cents. But breeding, yeah, absolutely. It's really, really important. And not only do you want to have certain noble varieties in your proprietary program, but also you want to make sure that it doesn't get jammed up in the middle pick window, which is right now where a lot of aroma varieties get jammed up. You want to have early picked noble varieties or late picked. And what Crosby has done recently, we actually just planted 10 acres of US Hallertau, for example, which is actually rootstock. It is Hallertau middle fruit rootstock that we've brought over and is now planted in our farm. Yields are awful, though. It's like 4 or 5 bales an acre.
What happened to Moroni?
Moroni?
Yeah.
That's an indie hops bred variety. I do think they tout that as noble-esque as well. But there's still such a high demand for middle fruit and sots and Tettnang and Hirschbrucker and Saphir and Magnum and all these European varieties. And actually, I forgot to mention earlier, I haven't really talked much about Germany or Czech Republic, but Germany now is the #1 hop growing country in the world in terms of acres, right? We overtook them many years ago with the rise of craft, and then as the decrease in acreage, about 26% from the peak, now Germany is the #1 hop growing country in the world. Kind of wild to see. And their swing has been a lot less. Like the US did this, they kind of did this little blip, right? Very stable.
This is slightly off subject for this particular conversation, but are there continuing breeding programs in like Germany and the UK and other hop growing regions for what would be considered modern varieties? There was
Yeah.
there was a time when these things started to sort of trickle out. It seems like
Yeah. I think it's more state sponsored than anything. For the Mandarinas, Blancs, Arianas, Callistas of the world. That actually is coming from federal dollars in Germany, for example. I can't speak to private breeding efforts by any of the folks over there, though.
Not necessarily private versus public, just like
Yeah. Yes, hop growers are always putting forth breeding efforts to combat climate change, or having drought-resistant varieties, or increasing resistance to downy or powdery mildew. Of course, always pushing for better yields, better resistance, less susceptibility, easier to grow, less labor, less water, right?
So is it that we just are simply in America and have access to the American growers so that hear about what they're making? We just don't hear about the European ones, or is it that they are literally putting out less than
They're putting out less new varieties. I mean, Tango is kind of a newer one coming out of Germany. So there definitely are being released, but keep in mind that craft is still young in Europe right now. They're nowhere where we are here in the US. So there's just such a higher demand for the next new thing here in the US, the shiny objects, right? So, cool. How are we doing on time? Okay, cool. Any last questions? And also, too, if you want to come up and chat with me and Trevor, be happy to chat.